The other day, I was scrolling through recent headlines about the latest diplomatic shifts when I came across a photograph from the recent summit in Saudi Arabia. In it, the air of transformation was almost palpable, whispers of a grand bargain, a 30-day ceasefire in Ukraine, and a sudden, unexpected warmth radiating from Washington toward Moscow. It felt as if the rigid geopolitical tectonic plates we've lived with for years were suddenly, violently beginning to slide. To a casual observer, it looks like the ultimate reversal. You see the headlines about Trump's phone calls to Putin and Marco Rubio's surprising nods toward multipolarity, and you start to wonder, is the no-limits partnership between China and Russia about to hit its limit? There's this persistent, almost romanticized anxiety in some circles, the idea that Russia, at its core, is a Western civilization just waiting for the right excuse to leap back into Europe's embrace and leave Beijing standing alone. But when you look closer, past the high-stakes optics of a Saudi summit, the reality feels much more clinical, even cold. I was talking with an expert who has spent years analyzing this triangle over rounds of vodka in Moscow and strategy sessions in Shanghai. He observed these frantic diplomatic maneuvers not with panic, but with a kind of detached, skeptical curiosity. He pointed out a glaring contradiction. While Washington talks of peeling Russia away from China, the structural reality is that the U.S. and Russia are actually fierce competitors in the one thing that keeps the Kremlin's lights on: energy. The giddy excitement over a potential grand bargain starts to look a lot like a fragile script that ignores the lack of mutual trust and the absence of any real economic glue. It raises a haunting question. Is this new triangle a masterstroke of 21st century realism, or is it a pursuit of a grand deal that neither side has the leverage or the time to actually deliver?
And that, I think, is the central question we have to dig into today. It's a fascinating and, frankly, very seductive narrative that's taking hold.
It is. It's everywhere. This idea of a grand pivot.
Yeah, you see it in Washington. You hear whispers of it in European capitals.
Yeah.
This kind of frantic hope that the whole chessboard can just be flipped. You've got the Trump administration back in office, and it looks for all the world like they're trying to pull off this massive diplomatic maneuver, a mirror image of something from the 1970s.
Right, the reverse Nixon. I mean, you can't escape the term. It's in every foreign policy journal, every op-ed. Reverse Nixon, reverse Kissinger. And the logic, on the surface, it feels so clean.
It does. It's very neat.
Nixon goes to China to box in the Soviets. So now Trump goes to Moscow to box in the Chinese. It's got this perfect, almost poetic symmetry to it.
And that's exactly why we should be suspicious.
Yeah.
Because geopolitics is almost never neat. It's messy, it's tangled up in history and economics and deep structural forces. Mm-hmm. So today, I think our job is to go beyond that. We're not just going to react to the latest tweet or the photo op from the summit. We need to actually look at the machinery, look under the floorboards of this relationship.
And we are definitely equipped to do that today. We've got a serious pile of source material here. We're not just skimming headlines. We have a really rigorous academic piece from the journal Survival.
Hughes and Leone, yeah, that one's excellent.
It traces the whole history of this reverse Kissinger idea. Then we've got some fantastic insider commentary from Carnegie Politica, that's by Timur Umarov, giving us the view from inside Russia.
Kremlin's perspective, basically.
Exactly. And then, this is the one I'm really excited about. We have a dense, fascinating transcript from a Stimson Center dialogue. It features Zhao Long from the Shanghai Institute for International Studies, so we're getting the direct line from Beijing.
The view from the other side of the partnership.
And of course, we have the foundational document itself, the Russia-China Joint Statement.
Which is, in a sense, the constitution of their alliance. It's the ideological bedrock.
Yes. So here's the mission for this deep dive. We're going to take this reverse Nixon fantasy, this mirage, and we're going to hold it up to the light of reality. We're going to examine it through three lenses: the structural barriers, the civilizational barriers, and finally, the physical ones.
The hard realities on the ground.
The hard realities. And to make this feel concrete, because let's be honest, trade statistics and treaty clauses can get a little dry.
A little abstract, yeah.
I want to anchor our whole conversation in three stories I've come across. These are, real-world perspectives. A logistics manager on the border, a researcher in Moscow, and a pipeline engineer in Siberia. I think their lives, their day-to-day realities actually tell us more about this triangle than any diplomatic communique ever could.
I love that. I love that approach because, policymakers and pundits, they love talking about grand bargains and moving pieces on a map.
Yeah.
But they often forget about the people who actually have to, manage the manifests or pour the concrete for the pipeline.
Right.
So where should we start? Let's begin with that structural argument. Why is this whole reverse Nixon play so much harder than it seems on paper?
Well, to understand that, let's go to the border. I want you to picture a man, let's call him Lee. I was reading this profile about the absolute explosion of infrastructure in the Russian Far East, and it described a logistics manager just like him. He's working at a massive freight terminal, maybe in Manzhouli or Sufene, right at that critical point where the wide Russian rail gauge meets the standard Chinese one.
The seam, the very artery of the whole partnership.
Actually. And you have to imagine Lee's day. It's brutally cold, maybe -20. The wind is just howling across the steppe. But the loudest noise isn't the wind. It's the constant screeching of train brakes, the clanging of containers. Day and night, he is watching thousands upon thousands of these containers get lifted from one train and put onto another.
And it's not what it used to be. It's not just timber and coal.
Not anymore. That's the crucial point. He sees raw materials going one way, sure, but now he's also seeing containers full of high-tech components, specialized industrial machinery, auto parts, all flowing north into Russia, and of course, energy flowing south. These containers, they've become the literal organs of each other's industrial bodies.
That is a very powerful image. Organs.
So imagine Lee takes a break, he pulls out his phone, scrolls through the news, and he sees a headline about Washington floating this reverse Nixon strategy, this idea that the U.S. could just, woo Moscow away from Beijing.
What's his reaction?
He doesn't panic. He just sort of smiles. He looks up from his phone, back at his manifest, which is just pages and pages long, and he sees a physical reality that it seems like Washington is completely ignoring. For him, this partnership, it's not a political mood. It's not a temporary choice. It's a structural fact, welded together by millions of tons of steel and shared assembly lines.
And Lai's skepticism is, it's completely justified. It actually perfectly mirrors the core argument in that survival article we mentioned, the one by Hughes and Leone.
Right.
They make this critical historical point. You simply cannot take the geopolitical map of 1972 and just overlay it onto 2026. The entire reverse Nixon concept fails because it ignores what they call the laws of gravity, the very laws that Lai is witnessing every single day at his terminal.
Okay, so let's unpack that. What makes 2026 so fundamentally different from 1972? I mean, apart from the obvious 50 years.
Well, think about the original,
Yeah.
the Nixon shock. The key thing to remember is that Richard Nixon did not create the Sino-Soviet split. He didn't have to. He just had to exploit it.
It was already there, a gaping wound.
A gaping wound is the perfect way to put it. I mean, they were literally shooting at each other. In 1969, just 3 years before Nixon's famous trip to China, there were serious, bloody border clashes on the Amur River.
Right, on Damansky Island.
Exactly. Soldiers were dying. On an ideological level, Mao and Brezhnev despised each other. The Soviets were openly talking about a preemptive nuclear strike on China's nascent nuclear facilities. The whole thing was a powder keg. Nixon just had to walk in with a match.
And he basically burned down the last bridge between them.
The wedge was already there. He just had to drive it in deeper. But now, fast forward to today. Look at Lee's border terminal. Is there shooting on the border?
No.
No. The Amur border disputes, they're settled. The whole border has been demarcated and finalized. By almost any measure, relations between Moscow and Beijing are at the highest point in their entire shared history. So Trump isn't trying to exploit an existing split. He's trying to manufacture one out of thin air. And that is an infinitely more difficult, if not impossible, diplomatic task.
It's the difference between trying to encourage a couple that's already fighting to get a divorce versus trying to break up a happy long-term marriage.
That is a fantastic analogy. And there's another structural barrier here, which Timur Umarov really drills down on in his piece for Carnegie Politica. He calls it the asymmetry of leverage.
The asymmetry of leverage.
Exactly. Let's just say, for the sake of argument, that Trump genuinely wants to seduce Putin away from Xi. What does he actually have in his pocket to offer?
Well, the conventional wisdom is sanctions relief,
Right.
a return to legitimacy on the world stage.
Sure, and those things they're nice, they're certainly appealing. But look at the fundamental economics. Back in the 1970s, what did the U.S. offer China? It was the golden ticket.
Entry into the global economy.
It was everything. It was access to the global capitalist system, access to technology, and most importantly, access to the American consumer. The U.S. market was the engine that powered the Chinese economic miracle for 30 years.
We bought their goods. We basically funded their rise.
You did. Now look at Russia today. What can the U.S. economy offer Russia on a structural level? Do we need their oil? Do we need their gas?
No, we're a competitor, a huge one.
A fierce competitor. The United States is now the world's largest producer of oil and natural gas. We are actively fighting with Russia for market share in Europe, in Asia, everywhere. Our economies don't complement each other.
Right.
China's economy, on the other hand, is the world's largest energy importer. Russia is a massive energy exporter. They fit together like a lock and key. The U.S. and Russian economies in the energy sector repel each other like two north poles of a magnet.
So the conversation goes something like, Washington says, hey, come back to our side. And Moscow says, great, to start, you can buy all the gas you've sanctioned.
And Washington has to say, no thanks. We're actually trying to sell our own LNG to the people you used to sell to. There's no economic glue to hold a deal together.
There's no there.
And that's before you even get to the strategic cost for Putin. I saw mention in The Strategist about the so-called Keith Kellogg plan.
Yeah, Keith Kellogg. He's been floated as Trump's special envoy for Russia and Ukraine. I've read a bit about his proposed strategy. It's ambitious.
Ambitious is one word for it. The core of the Kellogg plan, or at least the version that's been circulating in think tanks, is that for this grand reset to happen, Putin has to make a clean break. He has to distance himself from America's key adversaries.
Specifically, Iran and North Korea.
Exactly. It's basically dump your new friends and you can come sit at our table. But you have to think about what that actually means for Putin on a practical level. This isn't just a diplomatic gesture.
No, it's a battlefield calculation.
Right now, as we speak, Russia is relying on North Korean artillery shells and reportedly even troops to sustain its war effort in Ukraine. Every night, Iranian-made drones are hitting Ukrainian infrastructure. These aren't abstract alliances. They are tangible, critical assets that are keeping his war machine functioning.
So the American offer is essentially give up the concrete things that are helping you win your war.
For a promise.
For a handshake and a promise from an administration famous for its volatility.
Exactly. From Moscow's perspective, as Umarov argues, that's strategically suicidal. Why would you trade hard assets, shells, drones, battlefield support for a soft promise from a White House that could change its entire foreign policy with a single tweet or get voted out in 4 years?
Well, that volatility point is just huge. And it leads us perfectly to the view from Beijing. You'd think, with all this chatter about a reverse Nixon, that Xi Jinping would be, anxiously pacing the halls of Zhongnanhai.
Sweating bullets, yeah.
But then you read this Stimson Center transcript with Zhao Long, and he sounds almost bored.
Bored is a good word for it. The phrase he uses to describe the mood in Beijing is detached, skeptical curiosity.
Bored. That's almost insulting. It's like watching a child trying to perform a magic trick that you know is fake.
It's a little bit like that, yes. Because from Beijing's perspective, they just look at the structural realities we've been discussing, the energy symbiosis, the lack of U.S. economic leverage, the military codependence, and they come to a very simple conclusion. The U.S. simply lacks the, and this is their phrase, political will and capability to give Russia a better offer than the one China has already put on the table.
But don't they worry about the Trump factor, his famous unpredictability? I mean, we all saw the reports about that chaotic Oval Office meeting with Zelensky and J.D. Vance. There were shouting, conflicting messages. Doesn't that kind of chaos create an opening? Doesn't it worry China?
Paradoxically, Zhao Long argues that it does the exact opposite. Trump's unpredictability, the chaos factor, as he calls it, is actually one of the things that drives Russia and China closer together.
That seems counterintuitive.
Because if you're Vladimir Putin and you're looking at Washington and you see American foreign policy swinging wildly from one extreme to the other, from maximum pressure on Iran to a grand bargain with Russia, from isolationism to interventionism, you start to get whiplash.
You get dizzy.
You get dizzy. And in that kind of environment, you crave a stabilizer. You need an insurance policy. You need what he calls a predictable partner. And for all its faults, China's foreign policy is incredibly consistent. Xi Jinping isn't going to get voted out of office in 2 years. He's not going to wake up one morning and decide to tear up all his agreements on a whim.
So the chaos in Washington actually functions as the glue holding Eurasia together.
In a very real sense, yes. It reinforces the value of predictability. And reinforces the need for what our second set of sources calls civilizational resilience.
Which is a perfect transition. We've talked about the hardware of this relationship, the trade, the rails, the economics. Now we have to talk about the software, the ideology, the worldview.
The civilizational barrier. The fortress they're building.
And to really get our heads around this, I want to bring in that second perspective. I was on an international relations forum a while back, and I came across this post from a researcher. Let's call her Elena. She's based in Moscow. She's part of that generation that lived through the absolute chaos of the 1990s, saw the stabilization under early Putin, and is now living through this full-blown confrontation with the West.
What's her take on this idea of a Western alternative for Russia?
Well, she used this phrase that has really stuck with me. She said she gets institutional vertigo whenever she watches Western politics.
Institutional vertigo?
Yeah. She describes watching U.S. election cycles, the Brexit debate, the collapse of governments in Italy or Germany, and feeling physically dizzy. For her and her colleagues in the Russian establishment, the West represents a system where a new administration can come to power and, with the stroke of a pen, tear up every single treaty and agreement signed by its predecessor.
Like the Iran nuclear deal. Or the Paris Climate Accords, or the INF Treaty.
Exactly. Or even just the constant threat of pulling out of NATO. For Elena, the alignment with Beijing isn't just a marriage of convenience. It's a cure for that vertigo. She says they see it as building civilizational resilience. They believe they're constructing a new multipolar architecture specifically designed to survive what they see as this systemic decadence and inherent volatility of a unipolar Western-led world.
That phrase, institutional vertigo, is absolutely brilliant. It perfectly captures the visceral, almost physical reaction that Russian and Chinese elites have to the function of Western democracy. You know, we see it as a messy but ultimately self-correcting system. They see it as institutional schizophrenia.
And Elena's perspective made me realize something important. For them, this isn't just about being anti-West in some kind of petty, rebellious way. It's about building a fortress against a storm, a stabilizer. They feel like they're on a ship that's been tossed around by unpredictable Western political winds for 30 years, and China has become their ballast, their anchor.
And if you look at that joint statement that we mentioned, that enormous, sprawling document signed by Putin and Xi, it's basically the architectural blueprint for that fortress. They are methodically trying to rewrite the operating system of the international order to make the world safe for their kind of state.
I remember reading the section in that statement where they addressed the concept of democracy, and it was bold.
It is audacious because they don't say, we reject democracy. That would be too crude. They do something much more clever. They redefine it.
Yeah.
They introduce their own concept of sovereign democracy.
Right.
The joint statement explicitly says, and I'm paraphrasing here, there is no one-size-fits-all template for democracy.
Which is just a very polite diplomatic way of saying, stop lecturing us, stop telling us how to run our own countries.
That's precisely what it is. They are rejecting the universalist claim that has been at the heart of Western liberalism since the end of the Cold War. They're saying that Russian democracy can look like Vladimir Putin and Chinese democracy can look like Xi Jinping, and the West has no moral or legal right to judge either one. And this creates a powerful ideological bond, the bond of the common enemy.
The enemy being Western unilateralism.
Yes. In their shared narrative, NATO expansion in Europe and the U.S. Indo-Pacific strategy in Asia are not two separate regional issues. They see them as two fronts in a single coordinated campaign of containment designed to strangle them both.
And they see things like color revolutions as a key weapon in that campaign.
Absolutely. They are convinced that Western governments use NGOs, civil society protests, and social media to orchestrate the overthrow of regimes they don't like. So for them, aligning is a matter of regime survival.
This connects directly to that article from Russia in Global Affairs by Alexei Drobinin. He argues that the whole world is shifting away from globalization and towards something he calls civilizational platforms.
This is a really deep theoretical shift you're seeing in Moscow's foreign policy thinking. Drobinin's argument, which reflects official Kremlin doctrine, is that the era of a single, unified global system, the end of history model that Francis Fukuyama talked about, is dead. It's over.
So what's replacing it?
A world of competing, distinct civilizational blocks. You have the Western platform led by the U.S., and then you have what they're increasingly calling the world majority platform.
The world majority! That's a very specific, very deliberate piece of branding.
Oh, it's a brilliant branding strategy. Russia and China are actively trying to position themselves not as rogue states, but as the natural leaders of the global South. The leaders of the world majority standing up to what they derisively call the golden billion.
The golden billion being us, the West.
Yes. The wealthy, exclusive club, North America, Western Europe, Japan, Australia. They frame the West not as the leader of the free world, but as a selfish, declining minority that's hoarding the world's resources and trying to impose its values on everyone else. And you have to understand that narrative has a powerful appeal in many parts of Africa, Latin America, and Southeast Asia, where there are deep-seated grievances about colonialism and Western hegemony.
But is this just talk? Is it just rhetoric and branding, or are they actually building an alternative system?
That's where the ICS summary by Avinash Godbole comes in, because he makes the point that China, in particular, is acting as a norm builder. They aren't just complaining about the existing system. They are actively building a parallel one.
With its own institutions.
With its own institutions. You look at the Global Development Initiative, the GDI, the Global Security Initiative, the GSI, the expansion of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, the SKO, the recent massive expansion of the BRICS grouping. These aren't just talking shops. These are mechanisms designed to create and legitimize a different set of global norms.
The ballast that Elena was talking about.
It is the ballast. These institutions are designed to promote their model of state-led development and authoritarian governance as an effective, stable alternative to what they portray as Western chaos, decadence, and political paralysis.
Which brings us right back to the central issue of trust. If you genuinely believe that the Western system is decadent, chaotic, and fundamentally untrustworthy, why on earth would you sign a grand bargain with its leader?
You wouldn't. It makes no sense. The Strategist article makes this point so vividly. The very qualities that make Trump attractive to some of his supporters, his disruptiveness, his America First willingness to tear up agreements, are the exact same qualities that make him a terrifyingly unreliable treaty partner from a foreign perspective.
If he'll walk away from the Iran deal, a deal negotiated by multiple world powers...
And why wouldn't he walk away from a deal with Russia 6 months or 6 weeks later? From Putin's point of view, Xi Jinping's dedication to despotism, as one analyst put it, is a feature, not a bug.
It's a guarantee of stability.
It's a guarantee of continuity. He knows that Xi will be there in 5 years. He'll probably be there in 10 years. And he knows that China's core strategic interest in countering U.S. power is not going to change. In a world defined by institutional vertigo, you cling to the one pillar that you know isn't going to move. And for Vladimir Putin, that pillar is China.
So, okay, we've talked about the structural mismatch, the economic non-fit. We've talked about the civilizational fortress they're building, the shared worldview. But there's a third barrier. And I think this one, in some ways, is the most powerful because it's not just an idea in someone's head. It's physically buried in the ground.
The physical barrier, the hard infrastructure of the relationship.
Right. And for this, let's go to our third story. I want you to imagine a young engineer. Let's call him Chen. He's standing at the terminus of the Power of Siberia gas pipeline. He's at that point where the vast frozen Siberian taiga meets the booming industrial heartlands of northern China.
That is a monumental piece of infrastructure, just an incredible feat of engineering.
And Chen, he's not standing there thinking about the G7 or UN Security Council resolutions or diplomatic overtures. He's thinking about pressure. He's thinking about the sheer, undeniable, physical volume of natural gas flowing right under his feet, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
A physical fact.
This pipeline, it took a decade to negotiate and build. It cost tens of billions of dollars. It crosses thousands of miles of the most inhospitable territory on Earth. And once a thing like that is built, you can't just move it.
You can't reroute it.
You can't. Yeah. Chen knows that a handshake in a fancy hotel in Riyadh or Geneva cannot dismantle thousands of miles of buried steel. For him, the bond between these two countries is indissoluble. Not because their leaders are friends, but because that pipe is there. It provides tangible, non-negotiable heat to Chinese homes and generates tangible, non-negotiable revenue for the Russian state.
And Chen's reality on the ground is backed up by some truly eye-watering numbers in that Strategist article by Glenn Chaffetz. He breaks down what he calls the economics of survival, and the data is just stark.
Okay, lay them on us. What are we talking about?
So in 2024, the total bilateral trade volume between China and Russia hit approximately $237 billion US.
237 billion. Okay, that's a huge number, but let's put it in context.
For context, let's look at the bilateral trade between the US and Russia in that same period. Any guesses?
I'm guessing it's not 237 billion. Maybe. 20 billion. 30 billion?
It was about $3.5 billion.
Wait, say that again, 3.5?
$3.5 billion.
That's not even a rounding error. That's barely 1.5% of Russia's trade with China.
It's statistically irrelevant. It's nothing. So when you hear people in Washington talk about Russia pivoting back to the West, they're implicitly asking Russia to abandon a $237 billion economic lifeline in exchange for a $3.5 billion relationship with a direct energy competitor. It defies the most basic arithmetic. The Russian economy has already physically turned east. The ship has sailed.
And it's not just about oil and gas, is it? I was digging through a surprisingly detailed discussion on the Reddit Geopolitics forum about this. And honestly, sometimes the open source analysis there is top-notch. And they were really focused on the military-industrial integration.
It's an absolutely critical dimension. It's what the analysts call dual-use goods. We're not talking about tanks and jets necessarily. We're talking about the boring stuff that makes a modern military run.
Machine tools, ball bearings.
Semiconductors, precision optics, high-grade steels, the things you need to build missiles and drones and repair tanks. The West has put all this under strict sanctions. Russia can't get it from us, so where do they get it?
They get it from China.
They get it from China. So if Putin were to actually make this break, his entire war machine in Ukraine would literally grind to a halt within months. He's completely dependent.
And that dependency runs both ways to some extent, right? It's not just Russia taking things.
No, it's not entirely one-sided. Russia provides China with things it can't get elsewhere. Top-tier military technology, like the S-400 missile systems. And crucially, they are helping China build out its strategic early warning system for missile defense. That's a huge deal. They're also doing joint nuclear bomber patrols over the Sea of Japan.
So there was a debate in that forum you mentioned. They were calling it the shotgun wedding theory.
Yes, the shotgun wedding. The idea that Russia is now the clear junior partner, maybe even a vassal state, and that privately the Kremlin resents this dependency and hates it.
Which might be true.
It might very well be true. I'm sure Vladimir Putin doesn't love being the junior partner to Xi Jinping. But the counter-argument is that even if it is a shotgun wedding, well, there's a baby on the way now. The integration is so deep, the codependence is so total, that a divorce is simply not possible without destroying both households. It's a classic lock-in effect. They're stuck with each other.
I want to touch on one last physical frontier because it's a place where this competition is really heating up, the Arctic.
The high north, yes.
There's this theory, another part of the grand bargain idea, that Trump could entice Putin by inviting American energy giants, think ExxonMobil, companies like that, back into the Russian Arctic to help them drill.
The logic being that Russia desperately needs Western technology to exploit those difficult reserves, and bringing the U.S. in would push China out.
A classic divide and conquer play. But Zhao Long, our Shanghai-based expert from the Stimson transcript, he just completely flips this idea on its head. He argues that China wouldn't be threatened by more U.S. investment in the Russian Arctic. In fact, they'd welcome it. Why on earth would they welcome it? That seems completely counterintuitive. Aren't they strategic competitors up there?
They are, but think about the costs. Developing the Arctic, what they call the Ice Silk Road, is astronomically expensive and technically very risky. It requires building new ports, new fleets of icebreakers, new terminals, all in the harshest environment on the planet. It costs trillions of dollars. So from Beijing's perspective, if ExxonMobil wants to come in and spend billions of dollars of American capital to build all that expensive infrastructure,
China can just use it later.
China can just use it later. He literally calls it sharing the commercial risk. Zhao Long is basically saying, please, if the Americans want to pay to build the road, let them. We'll be happy to drive our trucks on it once it's finished. It doesn't push China out. It just massively lowers their cost of entry.
That is such a deeply pragmatic, almost ruthless way of looking at geopolitics. It completely sidesteps the zero-sum game that Washington thinks it's playing.
And speaking of people using the same words but meaning totally different things, we have to mention the Rubio factor.
Marco Rubio, yeah.
He surprised a lot of people in the foreign policy world recently by starting to use the word multipolarity,
which has for years been a classic Russian and Chinese buzzword for their preferred world order.
It's their term. But Zhao Long points out a very dangerous nuance here. When an American conservative like Marco Rubio says multipolarity, what he most likely means is a return to traditional spheres of influence.
Like, the U.S. controls the Western Hemisphere, Russia gets its near abroad, China gets Southeast Asia, and we all kind of balance each other out. The old way.
The old way, a concert of great powers. But when Beijing or Moscow says multipolarity, they mean something far more radical. They mean the definitive end of American global hegemony. They mean a world where the U.S. is just one great power among many with no special status, no special privileges.
They're using the exact same word, but they are describing two completely different and probably incompatible future worlds.
And even if Rubio were to grant Russia its sphere of influence, the structural reality is that Russia's sphere is now completely economically dependent on China's sphere. The gas in the pipeline Chen is managing still flows east, not west. You can't change that physical geography with a speech.
So let's try to pull all of these threads together. We started this deep dive with that photograph from Saudi Arabia. The handshakes, the smiles, the whispers of a grand bargain, this whole reverse Nixon mirage.
And I think piece by piece, we've taken it apart. We've seen that this reverse Nixon strategy is an attempt to apply a 20th century diplomatic solution to a 21st century reality of deep integration.
It's a strategy that ignores the structural reality that Lee, the logistics manager, sees every single day at the border, the reality of supply chains that are welded together.
And it ignores the civilizational reality that Elena, the researcher, feels in Moscow, that fortress mentality that has rejected Western instability in favor of authoritarian resilience.
And finally, it ignores the hard physical reality that Chen, the engineer, manages at the pipeline, the sheer immovable weight of the energy and infrastructure relationship that makes an economic divorce functionally impossible.
So when we look back at that photo now, we should see it for what it most likely is: theater. It's brilliant, high-stakes diplomatic theater. It's great for television. It drives news cycles, it might move the markets for a day or two, and it gets all the pundits and commentators excited.
But if you were to ask Li or Elena or Chen, they would probably tell you that the real history, the real story of the 21st century, isn't being written in a hotel conference room with a handshake. It's being written in the trade ledgers, in the blueprints for the civilizational fortress, and in the gas flowing through the pipelines. The reverse Nixon might be a fascinating play to watch, but in a theater that's built of steel and gas, it's almost certainly just that, a play.
A play that the audience in Beijing and Moscow is watching with, at best, a detached and very skeptical curiosity.